Hello, everybody. Welcome again to the Doomer Optimism podcast. Today we have a full panel of who I'm going to call the PNW Crew because they all are in the Pacific Northwest. Ioan, Jesse, Andy, and Denzolo. So I think we'll just start. Well, I wanted to reach out to them because they seem to be doing some cool things up there, farming and doing various projects. And I thought it would just be cool to kind of talk about what they're doing and then maybe brainstorm a little bit on where they want to go and um, how their example might translate to other regions as well. So that's kind of my idea for this podcast. So why don't we start? Ioan, why don't you go ahead and start because I've been in communication with you, and we'll go from there.
Right. So my name is Ioan. I grew up in Romania, kind of as a shy nerd, nerdy kid. But my dad, it was in the 80s, and as a communist country, my dad took over a piece of land between two apartment buildings and started gardening it. So that was my introduction to gardening and making food. And my parents were doing a lot of pickling and canning, and back then in the 80s, it was very hard to find food. So people relied on their grandparents and people in the countryside to get meat and other things you can buy in stores. So, but that's a little bit of the background and kind of Romanian subsistence farming in the 80s. But basically, um, I'm I went to France and studied physics, and then I ended up in California following somebody I was in love with. And then I was trying to be a hippie in California and met this guy who gave me my first job here, which was basically helping him with like edible landscapes in the Bay Area, and then helping him get started on a permaculture project in Southern Oregon. So that's how, like 20 years ago, Nai and I was introduced to Masanobu Fukuoka, and that's when my dream of like eventually owning land started, and that ended up happening basically 3 years ago. So I ended up miraculously being able to get this beautiful piece of land on the like couple miles from the Columbia River. They came with like 125 acres with pastures and two creeks and lots of woods and lots of buildings already there. And so I basically started going back and forth between living in Portland and the farm, and had this big dream of starting some sort of village or regenerative community, some sort of post-capitalist experiment of how we can live from abundance rather than scarcity, and went through a few difficult experiences trying to do that, and then ended up now about almost 3 years into it, where we are in a sort of more stable structure on the land, where basically there's Denzolo and Jesse who joined eventually, and then my son and his wife are also there with their 1-year-old baby. So I think that's kind of I don't know, that's enough of a background. I've been inspired by lots of sort of somewhat more spiritual things and more business things. There's like Charles Eisenstein with like gift economy, and David Abram with animism. And so I was hoping to create this place where there's something real, like food, and there's also a way to give people from the city an experience of being in nature and wilderness, and have something be sustainable economically. So, like a sort of a game bee, but basically like a proto bee experiment. I know you're familiar with that, so I'm just dropping that in. But yeah.
Yeah. Does Jim Rutt know about that you're starting one of these proto bees?
No, I was too shy to write Jim Rutt back 2 years ago. So, but maybe I will. Yeah.
Cool. All right. So who wants to go next?
I think Denzolo should go next because he was the next person who joined. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Denzolo. I'm an artist, a therapist, and a mystic who enjoys gardening and mushroom foraging and growing mushrooms. And that was part of how I ended up here. The main part of how I ended up here at Elk and Mist is through a community based in Portland called Process Work or Process Oriented Psychotherapy. And we shared a lot of friends and teachers in that community for many years, but didn't really know each other. And I heard that Ioan got this land and came and visited, and a lot resonated with me and him and with the land. And I had been living in Portland and studying process work, doing art and therapy for 10 years, and just tired of the city grind in a lot of ways, and really being called to nature and being called to grow food, and took had a lot of things in life changing, and took a big leap, and was just like, I'm moving an hour and a half from the city, 50 minutes from any city, and going to see what the conversation between me and the land and the folks who live there reveals. And I've been here for about a year now, and I'm focused on partially the food production, gardening aspect of this place. I also have done a lot of natural building. I do a lot of all kinds of building, and so there's a lot of infrastructure pre-existing here, but I also enjoy building saunas and yurts and things that can facilitate larger groups being here, and tapping springs, and just highly value being able to live in a place where I can tap a spring that comes out of the earth just like 100 yards away from where I live. And so with those skills and worlds coming together, I'm here trying to turn this place into a node, a retreat center, a place where other folks can come and follow their dreams and passions.
Very cool. Very cool. Who's next? Jesse?
I suppose
Yes.
I'm next. I'm Jesse, and let's see, what am I doing? Well, I've known Denzolo for about 10 years, like he said, through the process work community as well. And I was playing music in Portland for about 5 years. And at the time I started moving away from music and kind of just tagging along whatever Denzolo was doing and learning how to build, and that became its own little addiction. So around like mid full lockdown times, I was back in school studying psychology, and I was living very near campus, paying for an apartment that, there was no utility in the location anymore. And so I knew of a community in another part of the Pacific Northwest that I ended up just moving out to while I finished my degree remotely, and got 25 chickens, or I guess I got 10 and they all died because they got eaten by a weasel. But then you start over and you regroup, and then 25 became 50, and then I got some sheep, and then I got some pig, and it's just like, it just kind of snowballs. And I was buying in hay for the winter, and I had just bought in hay for the winter, and I was visiting Denzolo and Skamaka. Or are we being discreet?
Fine. Yeah. No.
So I was visiting Skamaka, which is a temperate rainforest. It's like the precip is like 100 inches, and there's green grass in the middle of winter. And I was like, I'm moving here, So from a like a solar harvesting standpoint, this place is hard to beat. So, and yeah, I've been here since the spring. We sized up the flock So we're up to like, we've got about 20 dairy sheep, East Friesians, and I just moved them this morning through the woods. That creek that Ioan mentioned is a beautiful place to pull electric fencing through. Well, not electric fencing, but polywire. So, yeah, so that's what I'm doing. I mean, ultimately, like from a more zoomed out perspective, I'm trying to figure out a way of making a living that feels, I want a reason to get out of bed every day. And I've had plenty of years where I didn't have one of those. And so that I'm also visually impaired. So I've always been trying to figure out how do I find work that will pair well with like, what I can do and these kind of things. So that's sort of the journey I'm on. And this opportunity is just, it's a beautiful thing. So.
Very cool. Andy, you want to go?
Sure. So my story kind of begins, I think it was 2015, and it begins with a friend introduced me to woofing. So I think a lot of people are familiar, but if you're not, woofing is willing workers on organic farms. So it's like a volunteer work exchange that you can go and stay on farms, and you get room and board for 4 to 5 hours a day. And I tried it out for a week, and it was just like this mind-blowing experience where I was like, oh, there's this whole other way of living where you can like work hard outside, and there's this whole like network of people around the world who are willing to share their homes and their harvest and their company with you. So I kind of like made some changes in my like life priorities as a result of this. I took I'd say most of the money that I had at the time and put a down payment on some land, but knowing full well that I didn't have many of the skills or like knowledge that I needed to actually be like useful on it yet. So I did like another year and a half where I was working or volunteering as a woofer, and it was like a really like formative time. Like I could go on probably for like most of the hour on like things that I learned while I was woofing, but I won't. And then fast forward like a few years, make a very long story short, I met my wife on a train, and we now have a small, she runs a market garden style, like John Martin style operation. We're on 2 acres and change, and we have, so she does the market garden, and we have various animals. That's more where I come in. So we've raised chickens and pigs for ourselves. We recently got some sheep, partially inspired by Jesse's sheep and instruction from the weekend that I was down there. And this year we got a backyard poultry permit, so we're doing like chickens in a kind of a larger way. And I got linked up with these guys because of Twitter. The Twitter algorithm has that chalk one in the pro column for Twitter. And yeah, I think it was Ashley who said, oh yeah, there's like these like DO camps that are happening. And so I saw that and got in touch with Ioan. And it just happened to be, I think I found out about it on Thursday and then started driving down on like Friday night. And yeah, and I came for the weekend, and then I think we'll get into this, but Jesse has then come up to our farm since then. And yeah, so that's a bit about me.
Cool. All right. Well, I think it might be cool to get into that camp where you did the chicken butchering, among other things. Do you want to talk about, somebody want to talk about that at all? How that went, what you think it might lead to in the future?
Sure, I'll start. I basically, one thing that I think it's interesting, that was helpful, that was really interesting for us, is that when I discovered somehow the podcast in the summer, and I shared it with Denzolo and Jesse, we all got very excited about it and started listening to it together, and it gave us something in common, something to talk about. And it actually brought us closer together, and it helped us navigate some like conflicts that we had. Like we had some emerging conflicts and we realized we had different, slightly different ideologies or way of looking at the world. Sorry, there's a train, but basically for me, it was really cool to see that on the podcast, there are left-wing people and right-wing people, and somehow they could talk to each other without getting bogged down in the politics and talk about the things that they were important, they had in common. So, and that helped us kind of get closer together as a group. And it also helped us focus and prepare a lot of things. Like Denzolo did a lot of work to prepare the campground so we can have people host people, and then Jesse did a lot of work to prepare because he was the main organizer of the activities. Like and then it was my first tweet in like 7 years, I think, the one where I tweeted about the weekend. So so Jesse is joking about how he has to breathe the diesel fumes on the farm, and I have to breathe the Twitter fumes on the farm, Yeah. So
hazard pay. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was very, and it was, that was kind of my introduction. And we kind of took different roles. Like I took the sort of vibe role to make sure the vibes are okay in the group. And then Denzolo did a lot of the infrastructure and invited a bunch of his friends that have also a lot of skills. And Jesse did all the, you can say more about that, the actual teaching. And we decided to focus more on kind of a workshop style rather than having people work.
Nice. Anyone else want to add anything to that event?
Yeah, so I didn't realize, or I think I think I had heard like, oh, chicken slaughtering is on the docket for the weekend. But then it definitely turned into the highlight. And I think it was like Jesse was taking the lead, but it was really kind of like this spontaneous thing where I realized like, oh, this is something that I've done several times before. And so it was really nice to just have that spontaneous like collaboration start to take place. Like Jesse would be kind of like leading, and then it just like naturally breaks into small groups, and like people are asking like, okay, like, so how do I find the gizzard? I forgot like which part that is and stuff like that. And so it just naturally like flows from that. From that, I think one other thing I remember thinking at the time, like, this is a really great way to avoid becoming like desensitized to the process, because now like we've done I think like 4 or 5 rounds of meat birds on our farm, but having it like seeing people go through that process for the first time was like really a good reminder that like this is a life that you're taking every single time, and it's like something that a lot of people don't see, and that like just seeing like, because there was like a wide range of also say like kind of emotional reactions and like levels of comfort with that process, and that was really good. And you pick up on all sorts of like little things like Jesse had a pair of kitchen scissors that we used for the necks, and we had previously been like dulling our knives trying to like get through the necks every time. So like there's all these like little tips and tricks that you just like, when you see someone else doing it, it's like both enlightening and it's like encouraging, because like, oh, you do the same thing. Like Jesse, we both have the same plucker, and it's like, oh, okay, so like we watched like kind of the same material and we came to the same conclusion. It's kind of like checking your work in a study group almost, and kind of seeing that other people are doing the same thing.
Yeah, that's a good framing too. I think the idea of even the word workshop might suggest a degree of expertise that I certainly don't claim. It was very much like I'm 50 feet up the trail on chicken butchering, and I guess have the audacity to think that that's a good thing to, to suggest as like, oh, I could show you, but it really is one of those things where it's like, oh, I've done them enough times that I could show someone else how I've learned how to do it. And I think one of Denzolo's friends, Harry, I had not processed the gizzards before. I had just given them to the pigs. And so I had never actually even opened up a gizzard and cleaned that out. And that's its whole own little thing. So the idea of a learning community or something like that feels more accurate. Though we do have an eye towards, some kind of workshop model moving forward.
Nice. Denzolo, you want to add anything?
Yeah, my part of that. Well, we had built it as a do-op camp, as in a co-op, but a do-operative. Even though, they're do camps, do-op. I just like the sound of that better, and it did really bring us together and focus the energy of the farm into this big thing. And our offerings were going to be milling a log, butchering chickens, and inoculating mushroom logs. Well, the tractor caught on fire like earlier that week, so milling a log was changed rapidly. We had a lot of people enthusiastic about learning to do chickens, some people who had done lots of chickens, and we had high hopes to do a bunch of chickens, but most of the chickens weren't quite fully to size yet. So we did 4 or 5 chickens with like 12 or 16 people. and mushroom logs, when it came to Sunday and all of that had already happened, when it came, mushroom logs is just drilling hole. It's a really tedious long, which is good for a lot of people, but it was a beautiful day out. And it's like, it's in season. Like, let's just go chanterelle hunting. Why would we like drill holes in logs right now? So, just sort of as the weekend unfolded, that was the sort of what we expected and what happened. But overall, it led to a lot of interesting connections and just a lot of vital energy forming of like, oh, like there's something fertile here. There's something that's generating, and like trying to locate and find what that is and continue to foster its growth.
Nice. Beautiful. Yeah, I mean, I found what you guys did really inspiring, because we tried to get DO camp here, and it was going to happen, and then we got rained out, and then a couple weeks later we tried to do it again, and it was just 2 of us. So it was kind of a letdown. So it was really cool to see that it kind of came together. Let me ask, was it just like your extended friends, or was it like, did you advertise it somehow, or so you got like 16 people or so?
Well, I think so. Basically, we got about 20 people, but I was quite proud that out of those 20 people, there were 6 complete strangers that showed up. One of whom was Andy, and then 4 women actually out of the 6 complete strangers, and that was just from Twitter and the Discord server. And I think some of the people who came were more from the teapot community that in Portland. I think Vivid Void, some friends from Vivid Void who wanted to come but couldn't make it at the last minute. So
do you want to describe what teapot is real quick?
This part of Twitter. So it's just people that are trying to be nice to each other on Twitter, which I'm also very new to, but I kind of got into it by following Rich Bartlett and Microsolidarity. So so it was amazing that like one tweet and me not having any following, it was my first tweet in 6 years or something, people actually showed up. And then it was a nice mix because there's 6 strangers and there's like a whole crew of Denzolo's friends who are kind of form of a Burning Man crew basically, who showed up. And we also wanted them to experience the land and So that was a mix between his friends and some of our other friends and just strangers from Twitter. We basically invited his friends just in case nobody showed up. So then we would still have something going on if nobody showed up from Twitter.
Nice, nice.
And I'll just add something that I had seen like in the day before I saw this Do Camp advertised. Someone had just posted something that was like, always go and meet your mutuals in real life. And I'm also like pretty noob on Twitter. I didn't know what Teapot was until 30 seconds ago. And I didn't know when they posted that, and I didn't actually know what a mutual was. Like, I didn't know that's a specific term. But anyway, I was just like, feeling like, yeah, like go meet people in real life, and good things will happen. And yeah, so here we are.
Very cool. Well, let me ask you this kind of a little bit more philosophically. Is the internet a good thing? And can it, what is the potential of these kinds of networks to spur more real life, meaningful things? A lot of people, I think, are not well served by the internet. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Interestingly, Jesse and I are not on Twitter, so Ioan is our bridge to that world, and so there's something just interesting in that. I've almost gotten on Twitter solely to like know what all of the Doomer Optimist conversations are happening. I know better because I know my internet just like attention is endlessly hackable and scrollable, and is like a constant struggle to maintain just attention insanity. And yet also a lot of things we do are taught by YouTube. Like here on the farm, it's like, how do you shear a sheep? There's no sheep shearers around Skamakaway, like YouTube.
Right. So it's kind of like a stand-in for local knowledge that used to be available, and now it's because it's less available, it's less common. We have to like reach further out to get that knowledge, and the internet allows us to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sort of mixed feelings about my sort of internet addiction that I identify as an addiction, but I feel like it's sort of like an expression of my ADHD brain to just be all over the place and go and look in a lot of different places at once. But more philosophically, I think that's something I've sort of naturally gravitated towards even before the internet, is being sort of a bridge, like Denzolo said, between different kinds of people, because I was always curious about different kinds of people. Like when I was in Paris, I was hanging out with the like really smart ass French people who were gonna have Fields Medal and math later, and my Romanian friends who were like into all kinds of obscure intellectual things, and then all the artsy people from all over the world that hang out at Shakespeare and Company. And so I've sort of always looked for people who are different from me so I can learn new things and expand in new places. And I don't always know if that's a good thing, but I'm sort of compelled to do it. So I think it's important to create these bridges between people who otherwise wouldn't meet each other. And I think the internet is great to get people to actually meet in real life. And that's like a project I'm trying to start now in Portland. We have a building, and which used to be the office of my company. We're calling it Bridge Space Commons, because we want to make it into like a bridge between different communities who would like use the same space and figure out how to navigate using a same space together, not being in a domination type of environment. And that's like crucial also about how do we share land with different people who have different backgrounds and different things that they're excited about and different traumas in their past and stuff. So to me, that's very rich and very exciting and very difficult also.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was definitely like a very specific vibe, like showing up to the do camp, and I think that is largely like that was because of the like kind of self-selecting. Like you were at least like either familiar with the podcast or like kind of in that circle, and so I don't know, like your original question being like, is the internet good? Like I think you can definitely have those sorts of connections and those that meeting happen without like the internet per se. Like the podcast like is could sort of like exist without the internet, but like I like to say the internet, I think like Craigslist is kind of like peak internet. Like it has like all the necessary like functionality, like back in 1998, and like a podcast would be similar, like similar. Like you could have the podcast without like the full blown like internet, but it kind of like you have all this extra stuff too, that comes with it. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been thinking lately because I find that on Twitter, it's just kind of a shit show. Like even DO Twitter is just kind of a shit show. Like people are always fighting. There's just always these arguments, and it's just kind of a drag. But what comes out of it is the podcast, right? Like that's where we meet people to interview. That's where we meet people who I've met in real life. And now what you guys are doing of like creating this, or what you're doing, Ioan, is shoot, I keep mispronouncing your name.
What helped me is that he said it's like Obi-Wan. Like
Obi-Wan.
one like Obi-Wan. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have this meeting space where you're trying to bring together, at least from what you described, trying to bring together like different people to have kind of like this common space. People from different backgrounds, and that's really, for me, that's the idea behind DO Twitter. But the internet and Twitter in particular is problematic, and it breeds a lot of dissension that I don't think would necessarily be there in a real space. And so I think it's really. You want to talk more about your vision for that, Ioan? Ioan?
Yeah, well, it's a bit early now, I think, but I can. But it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. So, let's see. I mean, it's similar to what I've been trying to do at the farm. There's a sense of abundance that, and a sense of responsibility that I felt when I managed to sort of miraculously get this huge piece of land, for the price of a sort of house in Portland and a sort of a regular mortgage. And there's a sense of responsibility. How do I share this? And there's the same sense in mortgage in Portland. I'm paying the mortgage on the space anyway, so let's figure out how to share it. And I know that it's going to be really difficult, but I'm really curious about what comes out when you just trust people and trust that people come from good intentions, and they can figure things out without a lot of structure and a lot of rules to begin with. I've experimented with that in my company, reading a lot of things about sociocracy, self-management, there's this book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux, and all these people who are trying to figure out how to do things together as a group. Like now this year, following micro solidarity, and how to get people to get to know each other and decide to do things together without that becoming a huge trauma-inducing conflict for everybody. And I don't know how, but I'm like compelled to try to experiment with it.
So in the language of micro solidarity, are you guys a crew? In the language of Rich Bartlett?
Yeah, I think the three of us are sort of a crew at the farm. Yes.
Very cool.
But we haven't really implemented a lot of the practices, or I'm the only one who's like reading the micro solidarity thing, but we kind of automatically were a crew beforehand also.
So Ioan, are you a benevolent feudal lord?
Yeah, Yes.
We should ask the
Unfortunately,
serfs. Yeah.
unfortunately, I mean, that's one of the things that we're trying to figure out, how to do that, how to, I mean, yeah, that we talked about it, and we haven't really figured out the way to, for me not to be that, given the
Has he been
mortgage and all
ever,
the other stuff.
Lord? I asked the wrong person.
What?
It's one framing of it. I mean, it's certainly when it comes to ownership and at the end of the day in our society, then that's there. But there's also a framing of symbiosis. And it's sort of like, if Ioan is a piece of land or a tree, and me and Jesse are organisms that know how to do things the tree doesn't do, but we need a tree to live on. And so there's a symbiosis there that isn't necessarily, it isn't inherently exploitative, but there's a lot of different ways of framing the dynamic.
Yeah. Interesting.
I mean, another way of framing dynamic is that I'm sort of sacrificing my sanity and all the savings I made over the whole 20 years to facilitate this experience for people, because and without any sort of clarity of how it's gonna go, if it's gonna work, and I'm sort of making that connection with the financial system by taking on a whole bunch of debt, basically. But I had the privilege to be able to take on debt, so I think that's a good role. Somebody needs to play that role to make things happen for other people who can't be in that system. So, and I really appreciate everybody who has a different set of skills than I do, and I think in an ideal world that just works. Based on personal relationships and people like learning from each other and being interested in each other rather than sort of a domination hierarchy.
Nice. Yeah. No, I asked that, just jokingly, but I mean, I think like we're in an age where you have to be pragmatic, and like, you have values like non-dominator hierarchies, right? Like that's a cool value. But you have to say a group of people wanted to like create a land trust or something, but like the legal impediments to that in many places are just enormous.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can't let like ideology get in the way of like, actually this works. We have a solid set of relationships and we can like move forward from here. So yeah, I think that's cool. I was just
I'm curious what Jesse would say about this.
Unmute. I was curious about what I would say too. I think there was this funny moment when we were like doing a cold plunge in the creek where, Ioan and I think we were in some kind of conflict, and but there was like the things that I'm trying to figure out how to do in my life, are like, I look up to Ioan as a person who's created, a business that like spans 2 continents. Like, I think that's cool, and he thinks what I'm doing is cool. So there is this interesting, it seems to hold a balance because of this. I think that there's like a respect for what we're doing, and both aspiring to do.
Yeah.
So feudal lord. Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard one too, because I'm very family oriented in my thinking, and I do think about the relationship between work and equity and time and inheritance and constraints. And so the idea of, building soil, for instance, or planting a tree, or any of these kind of like more tropey or land-based things that ultimately are like real and beautiful. Figuring out, is there a way of being able to do those things and know that like my kids are going to benefit from them, or some like I don't know, like nesting oneself in time intergenerationally. And it's kind of just an open question. I think one of the things we all three have in common living on this land, and I think Andy has this too, though, is just like a kind of like willing to try stuff and willing to fail to a degree. So yeah, I think we're kind of just working it out, but there's a lot of permission here. And I don't know, I feel pretty completely autonomous. I mean, another part of it too is like I do own the livestock and like all of the, like I've capitalized that venture, and Ioan owns the land, so it feels pretty. I'm not like running his sheep or something or like any of that. So and there's no tithing.
Right.
He did, when I showed up, he demanded tribute though. So and I sent a loaf of bread back to him.
Oh, right.
Payment. Yeah.
We are
Take that for what you will.
That was good bread.
Yep.
We are searching for our operating principles, charter, manifest. Like as we grow as a community, it works on this small scale, where we all knew each other, or like we're part of a bigger community already. But as we grow as a community, we do need more principles or some sort of, guiding written thing that or need to create some sort of central entity that like can give people the sense of equity without necessarily owning the land. And so we're still researching community guidelines and still forming that as we go.
Yeah, I mean there's rough ideas that are kind of obvious, that like the land is not necessarily going to be owned in common, but the structures that if people come and build a structure on the land, they can own that structure, or the revenue from that structure. And then we can eventually have various businesses that run on the land, and businesses can be owned in common by the people who run the businesses. Like Jesse owns the livestock operation and the revenue from that, and then Denzolo is helping do the infrastructure. So he will own part of the retreat center campground revenue, and I mostly get at this point the Airbnb revenue that helps pay the mortgage. But eventually that can be shared in a more clear way and more obvious way. So I looked at all kinds of software solutions, or there's hi-fi, and then there's all kinds of there's high-low, there's like holo, there's a whole bunch of high-tech things that might or might not help with that. But I think the first step is like the relationship building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like having a good, and kind of your setup that you guys are describing, having it based on good relationships, good friendships is key, in lieu of kind of like more formalized structures. And of course, if you want to grow, if more people are going to join, and you break the natural scale of a crew, going back to micro-solidarity framework, then not everything can be based on relationships, right? And then I can see those more formalized structures becoming more important, right? Where it's not solely based on, oh, this is just my best friend or whatever, so it's going to be great. Versus, oh, this guy's like an acquaintance, but I have like 20 other acquaintances who are part of this now too. So we gotta figure this out. So it's cool that you guys are kind of just like letting it evolve, and it seems like not rushing it. I'm curious, you mentioned, Ioan, about kind of how your relationships have evolved. I'm curious if any of you want to describe any more of that.
Yeah, how about you guys?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting arc for Jesse and I, in that we've been all kinds of different friends over 10 years, and done a lot of big and small projects together. And so moving out here was a really big step, and it was really like fun and amazing and fertile initially, and then we sort of got over the honeymoon, and we like, and then our shadows both just like erupted in terms of like resource competition, and like, oh, non-dominance, well, here's dominance for you, like full shadow dissension. And it's really lonely and isolated out here. And I go to the town a lot. I travel around the all over the place a fair bit for various things. And but Jesse's here. He's here a lot and always, almost. And so that was extreme isolation at the beginning. And so that was a big challenging navigation that we got partially through that, like, Jesse got a girlfriend, and that has like fixed tons of dynamics here and been a great change as the community grew in that way. But we also know through our relationship that we've gotten through hard times before, and so getting through that actually brings us closer together. And that's been a big part of the last 6 months, for me and both of us, I think. How's it for you,
Yeah, good
Jesse?
point. Yeah, well, I think Jesse got a girlfriend, but Jesse also read Wendell Berry while clipping the thistle. And so now I have this really nice, like, pretentious land-based perspective that I get to kind of quietly flaunt, where I'm like, well, you know, I have this relationship with this one piece of land. And it's true. And I do. And it's like, it's great. So I think there is something there that I had to metabolize and get through. And maybe that's just an interesting thing to talk about in general. We're all pretty big Wendell Berry fans, so I know Andy is too. But yeah, I think the process of moving out to such a, I think Ioan, is Wahkiakum 5,000 people or less?
Yeah, the whole
county?
county is 5,000 people. Yeah.
Yeah, so like at a certain point, I realized that, like, if I want to have social interactions, I'm going to need to like meet the neighbors and go to the Grange breakfast on Thursday morning, and be
And
helpful.
get on the internet.
Yeah, that I haven't interestingly done that. Well, I guess I did get on Hinge.
That's your girlfriend.
That's true. I know. I want to downplay that part though. We met at a coffee shop. No, no, she's so great. And yeah, our first conversation was about electric fence. So I was like, zing. Yeah, our relationship definitely with Denzolo and I has put through the ringer. I think previously it was always a project where you and I would come together, blitz something, and then take space. And relationships in the absence of some amount of space, I think, do interesting things. And then Ioan and I think we were kind of like, we might not have gotten as close outside of the constraint of living on the same piece of land. And I think we were somewhat mechanically forced into closeness and had to contend with ideological differences. And I think we're both I think all three of us are kind of provocateurs, so it's a little circus here sometimes. Yeah.
I mean, I think one thing I would say, since we're talking about relationships, I feel like the relationship with the land is something that really crucial and important. And I felt that as a huge responsibility when I moved off the land, like it was how to be in service to the land, or how to be in a relationship with the land, how to listen to the land. But it was this more kind of vague, sort of urban aspirational, like, I want to be on the land, I want to be in a relationship with the land. And I would go for long walks, and I lived in a tent for a couple months just to be in a relationship with the land. But then I feel like when Jesse came, then he did that part of the job that I felt like I had the responsibility to do, but I didn't have the time or the skills to do. And he took it on to such like an amazing extent, because he does these regenerative practices that are so over the top in the terms of how difficult it is to do, and how easily it would be, how much less work it would be to do it the sort of like lazy way. But he does everything the hard way, that is like doing it for the sake of the land, moving the fences every day, moving the chickens every day, moving the pigs every day. Like, he does all these things that take a lot of time, that are in like service to the land. So for me, that's like a huge thing that I feel like, oh, I appreciate that so much, and it's something that I didn't do, and I beat myself up for not like being up to it, So otherwise, yeah. And so I think that, to me, that's an interesting dimension, how the relationship with the land can help the relationship between people if we honor it. And me and Denzolo had that initial connection of wanting to be animists sort of together. And what is that like to be an animist, to behave as if everything around us is alive, is sentient, and has agency? The blades of grass, the trees, the pebbles, the wind, the mist, And that's also, we signed up for a mythic body class together with something organized by Emerald Podcast, to figure out what kind of rituals do we want to do? How do we want to acknowledge the endless sort of mystery of all living beings around us? And for me, that makes it rich enough to be worthwhile. It's not just about all the endless practical things that can be overwhelming, and there's some magic in it. Yeah. Nice.
Andy, I want to give you a chance if you want to talk. I know you're much newer to this group, but anything about relationships in this context that you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, so I think something that came out of the weekend was Jesse and I basically became pretty fast friends, because we had just like a lot of stuff in common. And like, I think just through that shared work, or that, shared recognition of like, oh, we're kind of like working on the same things. Like, there's like kind of a very quick bond that forms. And I think part of Jesse came up to do, he had been raising turkeys. And then because we have customers through our like backyard poultry permit, we kind of reached out to them and asked like if anyone would be interested in a turkey for Thanksgiving. And so he brought them up in the back of, it was a really funny sight, because it's like the back of this, it looks like a camper van. But then he opens it up and he's just got like straw like falling out, and like 5 huge turkeys. I mean, I'd say huge, but like they're actually like on the smaller side. They're not like a butterball, because they're not fed a bunch of crap. But yeah, so came up and we did like a turkey harvest, and sold those birds to some of our customers on the farm here. And yeah, just like I think other people have touched on this, like the like relationship, you can't just like form it in a vacuum. It takes like that shared experience, and that shared like working next to someone that like really bonds you pretty quickly. There was this is like a bit of a tangent, that there's another kind of Doomer adjacent guy who lives a little closer to me, and he had originally organized like a work party that, similar to yours, Jason, like turned into just like 2 or 3 people. And what we ended up doing was like lugging these house panels like up and over this like really rough trail And we had like rigged up this, like we basically bolted like several 2x4s onto like a hand cart dolly type thing, and like loaded these panels onto it and like dragged them by hand like up and over this hill. And at the end of it, it's like, oh, I like that is such a catalyst is what I'm getting at for forming a relationship, like standing next to someone and working and like just and also being outside. So yeah, that's what I would add is just like that shared work. And Jesse said it over the weekend. He's like shared work, eating together, working together, and playing together are like these really great catalysts for building those relationships. And it kind of reminds me of it's one of those things like, not to knock, like there's a lot of like terms and like fancy words you can put on these things, but at the end of the day, like it's really like it is as simple as you think it is. It's just like, you got to go out and work together with people. So yeah, that's what I got there.
Nice. Yeah, I think just going back to the Twitter dynamics, I think the lack of shared work is why it's so contentious so often. And so I've gone to seeing Twitter as like finding the others, but you can't really create community on Twitter. You can create a network, but the community is the shared work. And so, yeah, I think that's the missing element, because otherwise you're going to inevitably have these ideological differences. And I think shared work is also crucial, or even shared relation with a piece of land is like crucial to like, not letting these ideological differences, keep you from forming a relationship, and even maybe coming, working them out and maybe coming to some kind of synthesis between the two of you, or whatever it is. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit more. I know, Ioan, you mentioned one of the last podcasts we were talking about kind of like what is kind of a new, religion and spirituality look like in kind of like this kind of doomer optimist kind of sensibility, where we're kind of like all postmodern, trying to like reconstruct meaning in our lives and all of that. And you guys have kind of talked about it a little bit, but I'm curious if you have anything else to say about how this kind of shared work and creating this community would interface with kind of creating shared rituals and shared kind of spiritual sense.
I think I would want Denzolo to answer that, because I think he'll do a better job than I would, because he'll be less brainy and galaxy brain than me. Yeah, and that would be a good contrast with you, I think, because he just said he hated the meta modern term, so I think that would be an interesting chat.
I
actually deliberately didn't use that term because it comes across as pretentious.
I have problems with the term modern, but I think the Twitter can create relationships, but it cannot create embodied relationships. Embodiment is the thing that's lacking in all of these things. And so coming together, working together is embodiment, and embodiment is the way towards connection and ultimately, again, to go back to the emerald, embodiment means being torn apart. Embodiment means being torn apart. And so there's also, I don't feel compelled to go back to my Catholic upbringing or towards other organized systems of religion. I don't think it's easy, but I do believe there is a way that many people are finding by themselves and together through somatic practices, through embodiment, into trance states, into liminal states, where you can have experiences of conjunctive consciousness, transpersonal experiences. And that can happen through psychology, that can happen through group ritual and dance, that can happen with psychedelics, that can happen through meditation, yoga. It can happen through farming, and it can happen through running, it can happen through fasting. And there's so many ways we can access that. But that is what I believe the deeper longing is for that transpersonal experience. And we need good food and we need good air and water and connection to the land in order to prepare our bodies to have that experience that happens in ourselves and also brings us together. That's my initial go at it.
Yeah, I would add, like, for me, it was studying with David Abram, he's an amazing person, magical person who wrote a book called The Spell of the Sensuous, and also the Becoming Animal. And so he's a philosopher and anthropologist, and he sort of coined the term the more than human world. And so I was lucky enough to do some workshops with him, and he took us in the woods and in the desert and showed us how to be with the tree, how to dance and feel the breath of the tree without sort of any really strange woo things, or it doesn't have to be supernatural. It's like actual natural things. It's our ancestry of humans. When we had to survive in the wild, we had to know what this bird song means and what this rustle in the leaves means. And we lost all those abilities of our bodies to be in the world. We lost them because we got sort of hypnotized by written words, and we got into houses and we stopped living outside. So that's part of the things that we can have access to. We have access to as human beings, and in the real more than human world outside with trees and everything else and creeks. And
it's experiential, not conceptual. That's the trappings of Twitter and academia and listening to words and conversations through the internet is that everything is so already biased towards just conceptual, cerebral, rational, and ultimately materialism. And that just leaves us longing for the experiential, and that there is a whole wisdom in our spine that is connected to, but very different from the wisdom or information in our brain. And the experiential, just like creating these experiences felt in our body you can't think your way through to those. You have to dance or farm or move your way to those.
Andy or Jesse, do you guys have anything to add to this topic?
I have a bunch of like half-formed thoughts, so I won't throw any of those out just yet, but Jesse, feel free.
I have all sorts of half-formed thoughts. That's my stock and trade. Yeah, that was beautiful, DZ. I love it when you like catch something, you catch the wind in your sail and it's just like, yeah, I was reminded of, I remember listening on audiobook to chapter 6 of Unsettling of America, and he talks about the infinite pattern. That was the chapter about energy, and he talks about the infinite pattern as, I think he was juxtaposing that to the notion of infinite resources, and like the thing that is infinite and abundant is not the material resources, but rather the fact that they exist in a cycle of transformations. So, the sun comes down, grows the grass, feeds the cow fertilizes, with the magic rumen and all this kind of stuff, and builds the soil, I won't keep going there, but, and then feeds me. And, if I choose to, I can compost myself back into the soil, and there you go. So I remember having a daily relationship with that process and moving the animals onto the new grass that is very, you're tracking it for practical reasons, and you're like, oh, here's this clover, oh, this tussock has come in, I want to kind of work on that a little bit, or where does the water come from, in a very like the task needs to get done today kind of way. But then also seeing, it's a beautiful thing to like see the impact of chickens a couple weeks later, like this just long highway of green that's a little bit darker than everything around it. And then, I think for about a year, I've eaten mostly, except when I've been like in town or something. I'm not a purist, but like I've eaten meat that I've like killed, and that's a pretty unusual thing. Like I don't claim any sort of familial or cultural relationship to providing my own meat and food and like that kind of stuff. So it does produce, like DZ said, like an experiential change. My relationship to food prior to this was unhealthy and unbounded. And, I struggled for years with like my weight, and this sounds like a commercial, but the truth is like, because I can't drive into town, like I don't have access. So like if I'm hungry, I have to like go to the freezer, and there's just constraints that are put on your eating, and then you're moving your body every day. So I don't know. These are all the half-formed ideas, but for me, that feels like a kind of a pray with your feet embodied relationship. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest gifts of farming is it's not a heroic effort made. It's, it's just things need to get done. And in their doing, you just straighten out. I don't know another way to say it, but like for my part, I've just straightened out, and it's not been, it didn't come from me. I'll say that much. So.
Nice. Well, do you guys want to talk a little bit about kind of any future plans or brainstorming about what might develop in any way that we haven't already discussed? Ioan, you're muted.
Yeah, we'd like to do a lot more events like the one we did in October, and so we have a lot of projects on the farm. So I think the next one is going to be, we're going to butcher a cow together. But other projects that we have is like we want to finish the sauna, that maybe we could get help with that. We also want to do a lot of planting along the creek banks, and there's various sort of ecosystem or like restoration of things that we want to do. I think that would be fun to do. A bunch of people, like we planted a bunch of willows. Our friend Max came and helped us, and he planted a bunch of willows. So we want to do a lot of tree planting. So, and there's like a lot of garden prep. So there's projects like that hopefully will develop more relationships with people who want to come more often, who want to come and do their own thing at the farm or get inspired to do things. And there's also eventually there's this vague bioregional collaboration thing that we want to figure out how to use, like the space in Portland to be like a distribution center for farmers. Like we did that in 2020. There was a farmer from Corvallis who came and used our garage for delivering the CSA shares to mostly people of color in Portland. So there's lots of options like that, and there's a lot of people in Portland who want to figure out how to do community stuff. So, but I have no idea how that will actually manifest itself. It's just open at this point. Yes. And we want to do more events where people come for a week and do things at the farm. And yeah. Okay. I don't know if that's where you were going with that question, but that's
I'm curious if any of you other guys have what are your ideas?
Yeah, go for it, Jesse.
Just that in the most basic Joel Salatin way, I'm looking to make the farming profitable. And like Ioan said, it's definitely in accordance with regenerative. I don't know. All those words are going to go out of phase in a couple of years, but all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so that's my focus right now. I'm also like bigger picture. I was just listening to I can't remember what the title of the book is. I've just listened to this book so many times, the Joel Salatin book, where there's like a pig on it, but it's not about the pigness of pigs. It's the other one. And he was talking about therapy farms. And I've been really interested for many years in the medicinal aspect of farming, called it nature deprivation disorder, all this kind of stuff. And so, working with, the thing that I can bring to folks would be, I've figured out how to cast off victimology as best I can in the in the context of visual impairment. And it's totally just a thing that you have to try and have opportunities to fail, and a context for working with kids, especially like adolescent boys. I think it's like, that's all I know. I don't know much more than that. So
nice.
I that would be a beautiful thing. So
therapy farm is an interesting it's a good segue. One of our constraints is that it's just cold and rainy here this part of the year, so it's hard to really invite even a small group of people here to do things without like a little bit more facilities in the sauna at least. But as springtime comes, we are going to do animal tanning workshops, and these more like primitive and like farming skills feel like a very central part of it. Part of my passion is also adding to that, or in parallel with that, are workshops on play, dream workshops, men's groups, women's groups, ceremonies, rituals, full moons, solstices, equinoxes, these sort of navigating principles, where we bringing together retreats that the fact that you can eat food grown here and water that comes from here, and go to retreat and do meditation where everything is just like 0 food miles, all right there, all done right, is a very magical thing. And so, but offering this sort of more psychology, spirituality worlds of personal growth that are also important and essential to that. It can't just be the practicals, but they all need each other. And so trying to fill that out and offer all sorts of transformative experiences.
Nice. Andy, do you have something?
Yeah, I think my takeaway or plan is to just continue to meet your mutuals, as they say. And when, way back when, when I was just starting as a woofer, I kind of had this really individualist notion of what, the self-sufficient homestead, there's that book, the blue and red book. And you have this notion of you should, if you have 5 acres, you should be able to literally produce every single thing on that 5 acres and never have to leave. And I think that, as that didn't survive contact with reality, that notion, because you quickly realize the better approach is to know your neighbors and know the person that's growing the beef, and then you don't have to do that. And then if you are confident in your ability to produce something of value and do a trade situation, that is in many ways more fulfilling than just saying I'm gonna do it all myself that. And so and then just expanding that out even further to the relying on the larger what the internet can kind of like contribute to bring it back to that of like, it helps to find people who are not necessarily like down the street or in your town. But I never would have met these guys had it not been for the internet. And so just like continuing to tap into that network for the good stuff, and yeah, and meeting people that way, and making those connections.
Nice, very cool. I think we'll wrap up soon, but is there anything else that anybody wants to express that we could have talked about but didn't, and you want to bring up?
Well, one thing is, speaking of spiritual experiences, I think one of the people who showed up from Portland came specifically because they wanted to have an experience with killing their own meat, and they did have something that felt like a spiritual experience, and it was very challenging, but it was very, very moving and important for them. So that is an example of how to bring together both the practical and the spiritual, and sort of everything in between. And I think being on land like this, you see the cycle of life and death. Is especially in a wet climate, it just happens over and over. That is deep. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm also curious, you, Jason, how do you see the bioregional thing? Because I think you're trying to do something, and what are the practical things that you're doing to do the bioregional thing where you are, or that you think we should be doing that we're not already doing?
Well, you guys are ahead of me, so I don't have any practical advice, but I'm kind of two minds. Kind of theoretically, I'm interested in kind of bioregional kind of organization, right, and economies. But how to get there from here is very difficult because there's like, so like I'm like 2 hours from Asheville, North Carolina, and that's where kind of a lot of the people that I've met are, but that's even pretty far. So it's not like I can meet up with them for coffee and just kind of get to know people. And so the other option is just to build up hyper locally, right? Develop relationships like within the county. And I think that's kind of the foundation. And so that's kind of what I'm working on. I've been, we've lived in this place. We're in the Boone area for like 3 years, and so we're just kind of still getting to know this area and getting to know people, and met people online who we've developed relationships with and helped each other out on various projects and things. So that's nice. So we haven't really put together an event yet, that we call like bioregional, or at least like Western North Carolina kind of event, like you guys have. And so that's why I was really inspired by what you guys did. We almost pulled it off, but not quite. And so, I'm kind of, I'm a little bit optimistic about, you mentioned Hilo, that platform that, at least I think that their values are aligned. Like it's meant, they're building it for kind of bioregional coordination and regenerative food systems and these things, and they have a lot of features I think are conducive to that. And so I'm trying to we had like a Twitter group chat, and I'm trying to get them over to Hilo and test it out, and we're just starting to do that. And maybe that will help. Maybe that will help with our coordination issues. We'll see. And I think a lot of it is just distance, to be honest. So, I mean, that's the direction I want to head. Meanwhile, our family is developing our own little homestead, and all that. But I still feel like we're very much at the beginning of that process. And so, in terms of advice or what I think of what you guys are doing, I love everything you guys you're doing, and expressing. And so I find it inspiring. So I wish I had more advice, but I don't. I think, I hope our audience, can get, especially if they're interested in doing regional meetups and relationship building. You know, I think that they'll take inspiration, you know, from this conversation.
Yeah, we have a lot of space, so we're always welcome people who want to come and hang out for a couple of days, or you know, just check out the space. And
what's the best way to connect with you guys? Is it you, Ioan? Like, are you kind of like the
I'm the one who hangs out online. Yes, so yes.
And can we reveal your Twitter handle?
Yeah, it's awareness with 3 S's. Awareness. Yeah.
All right. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in the greater Portland area, you know, and you want to meet up with these guys, awareness is
yes.
Awesome. Anyone else want to say anything before we wrap up?
I'd like to express gratitude to you, Jason and Ashley, for what you guys have catalyzed and how you navigate just all of the insanity and trappings and magic of that. I have a lot of respect and gratitude for how this is blooming, and I'm just curious where it goes and proud to be a part of it. So thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for saying that. We're very curious to see where it goes too. We know that it, like, we're at a point where it needs to take some kind of evolutionary leap, besides just being a bunch of people who chat on Twitter, but we're not quite sure how to get there yet. We have ideas, but I think what you guys are doing is kind of a sign of what that might look like. You know, if we were to kind of have more of these types of things and more regions and more feedback. And I love, like, actually this conversation for me is really, you know, what I want the center of the podcast to be, of like people, you know, perhaps getting inspired through the podcast, people they meet through the community, doing really cool activities, and then talking about it, you know, on podcasts, having this feedback loop. You know, I think that would be, like, to me, you know, a really nice evolution. So thanks for expressing that.
And I really, go ahead.
I just wanted to second that, for one, and then share a half-formed thought from earlier, which is that when DZ was waxing poetic, my mind immediately was like, this is great, but it would be 1,000 times better if we were sitting around a campfire together. And so that's just getting out and making it happen in the real world is amazing.
My mom lives near Corvallis, and I'll visit her eventually. When I do, I'll definitely help you guys.
Right.
Yeah, I've actually lived there twice, for like a total of 4.5, 5 years. I'm a little bit familiar with the area and the vibe. Yeah, first time was really bad. It was like in middle school, and I came from New Mexico, and I hated the weather, and I was very lonely, lonely kid for about a year and a half. Anyway, I love the region, and I have positive feelings of it because of my mom and stepdad. Anyone else? Jesse, you have any last words?
Nope, not especially.
Okay.
I have one more thing to throw in there. Is
you can take my last words, Ioan.
All right, thank you. I feel like there's a sense in which you and Ashley sort of give permission, or give me permission to talk. You know, it's okay to talk to people that you disagree with, and it's actually good, and it's possible, and it's okay to talk about all kinds of things, not just be professional and talk about farming or about nature, but you can talk about spirituality. It's also, and you can be a whole person online and not have to, like, keep parts of it private because it's too weird. And I think that's a model, the way you model that together online for other people, and then give other people permission to be their whole selves and not have to wear a certain persona that it's okay to have or not okay to have in public. I think that's awesome, and it's inspiring. And and the fact that there's all these differences, I think it's crucial, because if the world is going to survive, we need to be able to get along and share space with people that we disagree with. And one person that's been very inspiring for me is Tyson Yunkaporta, who wrote the book Sand Talk. And he talks about, his podcast is called The Other Others. He talks about how, like, if you want to have a community that's a real community, you need to have the other others. You need to have people that are very different from you and maybe two steps away from you and different, in order to not get stuck in the bubble. And I think that's what we're trying to do, even though to live with people who are different from us, even though it's really difficult, it can lead to a lot of conflict. So I see you guys demonstrating on the podcast, despite all the fights on Twitter, that that's possible, and you have those conversations, and you see the humanity in the other people who, like, you have strong disagreements with on other things.
Thanks for expressing that. You guys are buttering me up. And Ashley, yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that, because that, I mean, one of the ideas going into it, for me at least, was this idea of mimetic mediation that was coined by this guy, Peter Lindbergh, which is basically exactly what you said, of, like, figuring out how to reach across difference, especially if we're thinking in kind of a current, industrial civilization breaking down in various ways. I don't see, the alternative besides just war, right? And doing it online is one thing, and I think I found kind of the limits to that. And part of my turn towards localism was that it actually has to be in community, around a campfire, and all of that. So yeah, it's really nice to hear that, because that was definitely an intention going into it. So glad you saw that. Cool. Well, thanks, guys. This is really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to hearing more about what you guys are doing, and maybe in 6 months or a year or so, we'll have you guys back on, and maybe a few new people, and we'll get an update. Also, I want to put out the invitation that if you guys want to host a podcast, that's kind of, why we're able to put out so many podcasts, is that, people take initiative, and if they want to host somebody else, like if there's somebody in your area that's just super interesting, doing great work, and you want to interview them, you guys are welcome to do that. You've passed the criteria is that usually, not always, but usually criteria is we have to have interviewed you. It's kind of like a gate check, but you passed that. So it'll be cool to have like a whole
I saved all my really offensive opinions for later.
What's that?
I said I saved my really offensive opinions for later. That's good.
You're right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it would be cool if, like, we had like battling regional kind of podcasts, like who could put out, which region could put out more, podcasts of, like, scenes, expressing their scene. Anyway, just wanted to
not quantity, but quality.
Quality, yes. Who can have
insane that you crowdsource your hosting of your podcast. It is insane, and I have so much complex feelings that you guys do that. But I think it's awesome that you do that.
Well, now I'm curious. What's the complex? What do you see as the potential downside of doing that?
Knowing the host of something, knowing someone who creates and guides you through an audio experience is such a significant thing, or even someone who curates that experience. Yeah. So to just straight up, almost not quite randomly, because if you're on it, then, but to just give away that opportunity to magnify their voice on your guys' speaker is it's totally unpredictable and unknown as to what quality and just all sorts of things happen. And so as a listener of the podcast, a frequent listener of the podcast, it's like listening to you guys who have really, you can even see the arc of your interviewing skills, like honing over time. and then someone's like first stab at it, there can be like a sort of like a wait, what am I listening? Like, what the fuck am I listening to right now? And like, do I want? Is this going so? In like, they're clearly smart, but like, and so there's just I both love and struggle with it at times, and I think it's a really cool experiment. That crowdsourcing is tough.
Yeah, it is. The podcast is a little disjointed. Like, you don't really know what's going to come week to week, and it might come back and bite us in the ass, right? We might have, for various just reasons, the content that comes up might be something that we're like, whoa, I don't want to be associated with that. But it's been okay so far. We'll see. But I think after we talk with people, you get a little bit of a sense of like, okay, I feel comfortable letting them post if they would like. So that's like our boundary criteria usually. But yeah, we'll see how that works. It's fun. It's fun, and it is it's in terms of quality, of course, but in terms of just like being able to put out things, not having to be responsible for like 3/4 or 4/5 of the podcast is like makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. It's cool.
Cool. All right, guys. This is great. Until next time, take care.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.